Hi, I'm Sonia with ACROBOTIC, and today we're going to be working with conductive thread to assemble a basic soft circuit. I'm going to be working with the components from ACROBOTIC's Sewable LED starter kit, which includes needles, a coin cell battery holder, and a spool of conductive thread. The LED in the starter kit is a self-blinking LED, and the one that I'm using for this tutorial is just your standard LED that you can find anywhere. So conductive thread is basically what it sounds like. It's thread that allows electricity to flow through it. It's spun from stainless steel that's about 8 microns thick, and it does have a resistance. Even though it allows electricity to flow through it, it does have a resistance, which is something you should be aware of. This conductive thread has about 30 ohms per foot, and that's something to keep in mind for depending on the circuit that you're going to build. If you need to have a lot of space between your components, that's going to add up. But if you don't, then it's not really something you should worry about. I'm going to be making my soft circuit on this patch of felt. And as you can see, I've made some pencil marks where I'm going to put my power source and the LED. You don't have to do this, but it just makes things easier. So the first thing that you do when you are sewing is you got to thread a needle. And the thing to keep in mind about conductive thread is that it frays easily because it's got that stainless steel in it, which can be really difficult to get the thread through the eye of the needle. If you've got quilting beeswax, that's a good thing to use. Another tip is to use a pair of scissors to cut off the end of the thread, which gives you a nice blunt end to put through the needle. Or you can just roll it between your fingers like I'm doing. So because conductive thread is kind of more stiff than regular thread, normally you would what you call double thread the needle, where you would pull it and it would be two pieces and you'd knot it here and sew that way. With conductive thread, one good thing to do is to make it a single thread. If you just twist it a little bit, and that'll be fine to work with. So the first part of my circuit that I'm going to sew is the power source. So the first thing that needs to go down is the coin cell battery holder. I'm going to do that by first securing the terminals with the conductive thread. And each terminal is going to go to the output, which will be the LED. So positive will go to the positive leg of the LED, and negative terminal will go to the negative part of the LED. So I'm going to start with underneath the piece of felt. I'm going to be careful that the thread doesn't go all the way through. And then just tie a knot at the end of the piece of thread. And like I mentioned before, conductive thread is really thick, so if you go one knot or double on the knot, that's enough to keep it from going straight through the piece of felt. And some people like to secure their components with a dab of hot glue to keep them from sliding around as they're trying to sew, and that's a really good thing to try. I'm not using that for this tutorial. So I'm just going to loop around a couple times. The rule of thumb is to make about 35 loops. As you're pushing through with your piece of thread, make sure that you don't pull on just the needle because you will undo the thread that you put through your needle. So once you get your loops through the terminals, kind of just next to the terminal, make a couple of loops of the conductive thread because you need to make a contact point for the path of your circuit. So at this point you can cut the thread there and make a knot. This is how I like to make a knot. If you use the needle, you can make sure that the knot is as close to the piece of felt as possible. This is just something that I picked up when I sew. When you make your knots with the conductive thread, make sure that you cut off any dangling pieces. The thing to keep in mind about conductive thread is that it's kind of like the wires of your circuit. So you want to make sure that two pieces that are not part of the same path don't touch each other, because then you get what's called a short circuit, and then your circuit won't function, and that's not what you want. So now we're going to sew the other terminal of the battery holder. And like before, I'm going to start from the bottom. Don't forget to put a knot at the end of your piece of thread, otherwise you're going to keep pulling and it's just going to go straight through. Trust me, I've done it before. So you're just going to make the same number of loops that you did for the previous terminal. As you go along, you might be tempted to speed up, but because conductive thread doesn't have the same properties as regular thread, you might want to take your time and just make sure you're paying attention, because conductive thread has been known to snap. So I'm going to make this knot to finish up this side, using the needle again to help me make my knot. Making sure to cut any straggly ends. So now we've secured the battery holder. Now I'm going to take our LED and put it into the circuit. So LEDs have polarity, a negative side and a positive side. The shorter leg of an LED is the negative side and the longer leg is the positive side. And there's also a flat end on the plastic that'll let you know that that's the negative side. I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to curl the legs of the LED, which makes it really easy for the conductive thread to sew around and secure the LED. And as you're doing that, make sure that you keep track of which is the negative and which is the positive. But even if you forget which one was the short leg and which one was the long leg, you can look for that flat side on the plastic. So the polarity of the LED has to match up with the polarity of the battery. Make sure that the negative goes to the negative and the positive goes to the positive. I'm going to take my conductive thread and I'm going to secure the LED. And to do this, I'm going to sew around the curl of the LED leg. Always making sure to knot the end of the first stitch. I'm gonna cut a fresh piece of conductive thread because this one was getting really short. Conductive thread is a very useful material, so if you have little pieces like that, save them because they might come in handy later. So now I'm sewing the other positive terminal of the LED, and I'm using the same method that I used with the negative leg, trying to make as many loops, roughly around 30-35 works. And you want to make sure that the loops are tight around the legs so that things are kind of real snug and there's close contact. So now our components are secured on the piece of felt. So now I'm going to show you a few stitches that you can use in your circuit. The first stitch is your basic in-out around the fabric stitch. So I'm going to start at the contact point of where the thread that was sewn onto the battery terminal ended. And before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and knot the end of the thread. 2 knots is always good for safety. So your basic stitching, you just go up and back into the thread, just in, out, in and out. And each stitch is basically the same length, so the ones underneath the felt are about the same length as the ones on top of the felt. So then you end up with just basic stitch. So I'm going to do the basic stitch halfway through the signal path. And the signal path is connecting the negative terminal of the battery over to the negative leg of the LED. And this basic stitching is fine for when you have a short circuit path like I do here. Now I'm going to show you sort of the kind of stitch that you want to do if you want to cover a lot of ground quickly. And that's just doing very long spaces between the points that you go into the fabric and out. So as you can see, it took me a fraction of the time to get to my end point than the basic stitching did. So I reached the end and I'm going to knot the conductive thread using my favorite method, which is using the needle. So as you can see, the basic stitching, it's tighter, and this other stitching, it was a lot faster to do. And the stitches are longer, a lot longer than the basic stitching. So now I'm going to sew the other side of the circuit, the positive terminal to the positive leg of the LED. I'm going to get a nice and long piece of conductive thread for this one. I also like to twirl the thread between my fingers to kind of keep it from fraying, to get it through the eye of the needle. And you can also add the knot at the end of the thread before you even start sewing. That's a good rule of thumb. Double knotting, because that's always a good practice. So just like with the other terminal, I'm going to start at the contact point that I made. So you can see all the conductive thread kind of come together on that end. I'm going to start making sure that this new piece touches with the old piece that's already there. So this kind of stitching that I'm going to show you for this side of the circuit is for when you have a part of the fabric that you don't really want to see stitching on. So the side that's facing you is going to have very small stitches that are visible, but on the back side it's going to have longer pieces, and that's where most of the stitching is going to hide. So since I'm on the top face, I'm going to make a very small stitch, and got caught on my pliers. So on the back of the felt, I'm going to make a longer stitch, and on the front side I'm going to make a shorter one, and just like that we're going to continue until we get to the LED. And what makes a short stitch and what makes a long stitch is just how close you put it to your last point. And for the purposes of this video, my stitching isn't very nice looking. So when you're working on your project, you can take the time to make sure that your stitching is really nice looking or makes a pretty pattern. Which is part of the fun of wearable projects, is that not only are they techie, but there's a creative element to it. So it's like you're combining arts and crafts with tinkering. So I've made it all the way over to my LED, and now I gotta make sure that that path, that stitching ends directly in contact with the conductive thread of where I want it to go. So you could even use this piece of conductive thread to make even more loops around the legs of the LED, which have been curled. Because just like with regular circuits, you want to make sure that your circuit loop is closed. So the pieces of conductive thread that need to connect need to overlap, and you need to make sure that they're making good contact with each other. So now we've finished our circuit. We've got the power source, which will be over here, and the LED, which is over here. And we've made sure that we've got signal path here and signal path there. But as you can see, this kind of stitching you can barely see on this side because most of the thread has been stitched on the back. Let me just get rid of that loose end. See, if you don't cut loose pieces of thread, because this is a soft circuit, that piece could end up crossing over to the other side and causing a short circuit. And what I like to do with the pieces of conductive thread that I leave over is that sometimes you can incorporate them and sew them into paths where you feel like you need to reduce the resistance. So they're good for that. So now we're going to complete our circuit by actually inserting the battery into the battery holder. Now the battery also has polarity, and the top side has a plus sign, and that's the plus side, and the bottom, which has no writing on it, is the negative. And as you can see on the battery holder, the negative side goes on the bottom. So it's like facing up. It's almost like heads and tails on a coin. And as you can see, we've closed our circuit and the LED is lighting up. So there you have it. That's how you can build a very basic soft circuit using ACROBOTIC's Sewable LED Starter Kit. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Thanks for watching.